Beautiful people. It's Shakima just stopping in for today's podcast on how to set effective boundaries in our relationships. This is a pretty big topic. It's a very, detrimental topic in terms of where we are as a society today because we're so hypersensitive about everything these days. Anything and everything triggers. So I was guided to, speak on this particular subject based on my own personal circumstances. And I was inspired because Spirit basically just said to me that there are other people that would potentially benefit from some of the things that I've learned, and we could just kind of have an open discussion about it. Potentially for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll just kind of see how we kind of go with the flow of everything. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get straight into it. Right, guys. So I just wanted to touch in on the topic of boundaries because it is definitely something that we are lacking somewhat in relationships. Sometimes I think firstly, what I want to start off with is what are boundaries, because sometimes we can be a little bit vindictive and assume that we are setting boundaries for ourselves, and that's not really a boundary. It's just we are now reacting to, being triggered. And that's something completely different to a boundary, because a boundary is pretty much to set the, limits in place before you get to that point of being triggered. So to me, this is my personal experience of it. A boundary is what you set in place to avoid getting into situations where you may be triggered, to avoid getting into circumstances with a particular individual where you may be triggered to go into your low vibrational reflection of yourself, where you're sort of reminded of past traumas or demons, essentially, that we're still carrying. And with those types of situations, it's never really that straightforward, because a lot of the times we don't really want to be vulnerable to a person to just be outright and say, okay, this is something that triggers me, and this is why it triggers me. This is where it takes me back to, and this is why I choose not to go back there. We need these in all types of relationships. When I think about, relationships, I'm sure that there's a lot of people that would automatically assume that this is romantic relationships. But we need boundaries in all sorts of relationships. We need boundaries in our romantic relationships. We need boundaries in our friendships. We need boundaries in our colleagueships. We need boundaries in our business partnerships. We need boundaries in our parentships. We just need boundaries altogether. A boundary basically protects us from other people's projections, and it also protects other people from our own projections of our own shadows. A boundary gives us an opportunity to be able to say, hey, I am not willing to take myself out of character and go back into a reactionary measure of myself, because when we don't have effective boundaries in place, guess what? We go to our wounded self, we go to our demons, we go to our shadows. And when we are triggered, we are just in survival mode. We are just literally reacting to the sequence of situations that has shown up to let us know that we are unsafe, or at least that's how our minds are registering the situation and circumstances. When we speak about boundaries, it's really to give us an opportunity to be able to, like I say, not just protect ourselves, but also to protect that other person from our own projections, because we ourselves sometimes don't even know when we're projecting. We don't even realize when we're projecting because we're not so honest with ourselves, first and foremost. When we think about, dishonesty, it's natural for us to assume that that's something that happens, by us telling lies to other people, but that's not necessarily just, that's a one-dimensional reflection of it. when we are dishonest, we are actually dishonest to ourselves first and foremost. And then it shows up as us potentially, being dishonest with other people around us. What boundaries give us an opportunity to do is to be able to just be completely honest with ourselves first and foremost and say, okay, this is going to be a trigger for me. If you go beyond this point, this is potentially how I may react because it's an old wound. It's a void for me. You are literally triggering my scars of my past situations that I haven't necessarily dealt with, or I'm still in the process of dealing with, or I'm a little bit raw in my emotions on the situation because it's still fresh. It's a sore wound for me. And when we do have, effective boundaries in place, one, it gives that person some insight into potentially just how to navigate through the process when they're sort of interacting with us. And also for ourselves as well, we know our limits. We know our limits. We know that if you take me beyond this limit, I not to say that I can't be held responsible for how I react, but just know that there may be a part of me or a side to me that you've never seen before. And that's because you have pushed me beyond the threshold of my natural nature of my character that you're particularly used to. And now we're having to engage in this kind of dynamic where it's unhealthy trigger for trigger. Boundaries are very, very important in relationships, all types of relationships. It's really, really important in, particularly even in sibling relationships as well. It's important in relationships with our relatives, i.e., our extended family, our immediate family. Is very, very, very important because it allows for us to be able to safeguard our nature of our character, and also it allows for that person to be able to get familiar with us. It allows for that person to be able to get an understanding of us. It allows for that person to be able to just get a better perspective of who we are as an individual. But a lot of the times, like I say, we're not so honest with ourselves first and foremost about what issues or what wounds may be triggered for us. And a lot of the times we don't actually even know, because a lot of our wounds are subjected to our subconscious programming. These are our subpersonalities, which shows up as past trauma, our demons, as I call it, our shadows. And these shadows have a personality themselves within us. They have formulated personalities themselves within us. And why we should have boundaries is to be able to safeguard ourselves from these low vibrational reflections of ourselves using us to be able to perpetuate cycles of past trauma. And also it protects other people from our demons, from our shadows. A lot of the times we don't necessarily know how much we've been impacted by a situation until it actually shows up in a different form or in a different circumstance of our relationships. So a lot of the times, put it to you, for instance, in friendships, because I've been in situations like these in the past where, based on a person's personal situation with their own um parental relationship or romantic relationship or their own insecurities in friendships, they would give you advice based on what their personal viewpoint on situations are. And that advice is subject to their own demons, to their own shadows. And you kind of have to read in between the lines, because a lot of people, like I said, they're not aware of a lot of these subpersonalities that are speaking through them and using them as vessels to basically just communicate the wounds of their trauma. Um, and they might just give you bad advice. And it's not necessarily bad advice as such, it's just not advice that is conducive to where you are in life. And it's just not advice that is conducive to maybe who you are as an individual. Because I've had this in past situations, like I said, with friends where I would want advice maybe on something to do with another friend, and their advice is pretty biased depending on how they feel towards that person. Or They may give me, I may sort of, as a female, we have girl talks, and they may give me, personal advice on romantic relationships. And again, that may be subject to their own personal traumas in terms of romantic relationships, and also their personal feelings about the partner. And I've had situations, even with circumstances to do with having communication with friends about parental relationships. And again, because of their own maybe dysfunction in their own parental relationships, they would project their own insecurities when giving advice, because there aren't effective boundaries set in place to be able to do so. I see Diablo's calling in. Do you want to write me a message and let me know what's the inquiry about? Because today isn't a call-in session. Today is actually just a, you know, vibing with the tribe sort of session. This is what spirits kind of advised me that I need to sort of touch base and speak on for today. So, yeah, just kind of outline in the chat basically what you're open to discussing live. If you don't realize that it's a live request that you're putting through. Um, what I will also say as well, it's really just to give us an opportunity to be able to just gain a deeper perspective of ourselves. Don't get me wrong, triggers are necessary. They are a necessary part of the growing process and the evolution process for an individual. But boundaries are also equally important, particularly in our romantic relationships as well, I'd say, as well as our friendships, parental relationships as well, sibling relationships as well, because these are places where we will just get triggered left, right, and center. And if we're not careful about the parts of ourselves, our subconscious programmings that are creating these realities for us, it can be very, very detrimental to these relationships without us even being aware as to why it feels so, I guess, challenging. Again, boundaries are it's kind of like a safety blanket. It's a firewall program that we are putting in place in certain relationship dynamics to be able to avoid us having to go into barriers. Because when we're not, having effective boundaries in place with people, guess what? We shut down and we go into just barricading ourselves. We jump ship and we disconnect from the love within ourselves out of fear that we will be hurt by this person. Which again, like I said, it's all about survival mode. That's kind of what is transpiring in those dynamics, and in those particular experiences. But what I will say is that a boundary will help us to navigate our way through certain relationships. For instance, okay, so sometimes because we're teaching people how to love us, this is very, very important. This is particularly why boundaries are important, because a person will only love us how they know how to love themselves. So if a person is used to loving themselves in a way where they are disrespectful to themselves, they may be privy or prone, it's probably a better word, prone to calling you out of your name, as they go out of their own character. And, this is a spirit of anger that is speaking through them at this point, because I think if a person is speaking to you and calling you out of your name, in most cases, they're in a heated scenario, where the tempers are really quite high. And it's a case of them feeling like they need to be on a defense. And now the only way for them to be able to defend themselves is to degrade your character by calling you out of your name. Now, yes, this is a disrespect to you, but first and foremost, this is a disrespect from this person to themselves, first and foremost. And this is what one needs to understand. One needs to understand, okay, we kind of have to read between the lines when we're engaging in relationships with people, because if a person's going to call you out of your name, that means that they're used to being called out of their name. That means that they're used to being called very derogative names, and they're used to verbal abuse. So for me personally, to rise above those types of reflections or those vibrational entities of a person, the best thing that one can do is not to engage. Don't engage in that kind of behavior, because that spirit is basically trying to draw you in so that it can feed off you. It can feed. The spirit of anger is basically trying to use that person as a vessel to feed off you, to make you angry and draw you into anger, so that it can feed off more beings, of more vessels. Just as much as, we have angels, we have fallen angels, we have dark angels that are working for the dark forces, and they show up through low vibrational reflections of ourselves, i.e., low vibrational emotions like guilt, anger, frustration, anxiety, worry. Fear is literally an entity in itself, like a massive black hole of a shadow, that just draws us in. And the thing is, I wouldn't even say the trick. The best thing that one can do for themselves is to rise above that, and not, stoop to a level that is beneath their own worth. This is one of the things that I've been navigating through as of recent as well. Self-worth. What does self-worth mean? What does self-worth look like? I've been navigating through the process of self-worth with spirit, God, the universe, the divine, good over darkness, whatever you want to call it. To be able to get a better perspective on my own personal value, because our value will basically be based on what we were taught as children, the foundations of ourselves, built by the information that is stored within our root chakra, right? And with the self-worth circumstances, there was a point where I was assuming that my self-worth was based on me being harsh, or me being blunt and abrasive in situations, until I realized that that's just not actually who I am. And when I talk about self-worth, it's about valuing myself enough to not take myself out of character, to stoop to somebody else's low vibrational reflection of themselves. You may even with parental relationships, a parent might even advise you in a way where, just because you're a child, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're less qualified, I guess, to give advice. But you might find yourself in situations where you go to get advice from a parent or a parental figure, and depending on where their consciousness is, they may give you advice that just isn't necessarily in resonance with you, advice that is just basically based on their own personal circumstances, what they've been through, where they're at on their own journey, and whatever perspective they have to give. It's just one of those situations where we kind of have to be open to the process of, I guess, hearing the individual out, but we have to read between the lines and be clear about what is for us and what isn't. Is this person, is the advice that this person giving me sincerely for my personal situation, or are they projecting their own personal wounds into my space? Because that can make for a very detrimental process of how you navigate your way through whatever situation you seek advice about. So we kind of just have to be consciously aware, okay, consciously aware about what we are doing in our relationships, why we're doing the things that we're doing in our relationships, and I guess the people that we are engaging in relationships with, because this is why boundaries are very, very important. People project all the time, consciously, subconsciously, knowingly, unknowingly. People are constantly projecting parts of themselves. This is how we engage in co-creating our reality as a collective together. And especially for the people that are unconsciously, projecting, it's not a safe environment for us to be in, which is why boundaries are very, very important in relationships, because for one, it protects us from their projections, but also it gives us an opportunity to stay in our own character, to stay strong in the nature of our own essence, instead of being tainted by their wounds, by their traumas that they potentially aren't actually addressing or dealing with. Because a lot of, for the people that are projecting subconsciously, these are subconscious programmings, these are sub personalities in their subconscious mind that is projecting from a place where their conscious mind isn't even aware. And unless these people are willing to actually do the work on themselves, they may never become aware. But you can protect yourself by setting effective boundaries in place to say, hey, I don't actually like the way that you're having, you know, what you were saying about this person, or the way that it made me feel when you were having this particular conversation. We just have to be very, very transparent, because what works for one person may not necessarily be our cup of tea, and that's okay. We have to be completely transparent. We have to be honest with ourselves about where we're at on our own personal journeys, and give that person an opportunity to gain some insight and perspective. And also try not to feed that person to their own shadow. Try not to like engage in a dark spirit or a dark, I guess, reflection of themselves, because you're just kind of feeding them to a force that they aren't even consciously aware of. They're not aware that they're still navigating through a situation, through the ruins of a past relationship that may have happened 5, 10, 15 years ago. They're not aware that the relationship advice that they're giving you is based on their own personal traumas within relationships. And again, albeit it can be any particular type of relationships. Relationships aren't just restricted to romantic relationships. There's sibling relationships, there's parental relationships, colleague relationships, there are aunts and uncle relationships. There are different types of ships that we have to navigate our way through. And boundaries are very, very important in these ships, because when we are engaging in all of these different, I guess, relationships with people, we're tapping into different facets of ourselves, because what we may engage in with one person, we may not be open or inclined to engaging with another person. And if we don't have effective boundaries in place, we may just get eaten alive by other people's shadows. And that's the reality. We have to be able to have open conversations and say, okay, the thing about a boundary is a means of having a consequence for the action. So you can't say to a person, okay, I don't like it when, you project your spirit of anger towards me. I would rather you learn how to contain your reflection of anger, because I know for the most part you're trying to work on it. But when you take yourself into that place, it then triggers me to go into my low vibrational reflection of anger, and I don't want to be that person anymore. But what is the consequence of them potentially acting out of character and going into their anger? Boundaries have to have consequences. Otherwise, it's pretty much just something that you're saying as a threat to a person that holds no value to it. And what their demon, basically, their entity, their low vibrational reflection of themselves, basically learn from that is that they can press your buttons, because by them actually engaging in pressing your buttons and triggering you, you are going to be an easy target, because you have no consequences for them actually doing that. So when we're talking about boundaries, you kind of have to be open to saying, okay, if you are, I know that you're working on your anger situation. Okay. And this is for anyone. Like, this could even be a parent, because sometimes parents can be a little bit ignorant when they're dealing with their children as well, because they, can be a little bit impatient. If you project your anger at me another time, I can't be held responsible for how I'm going to react, because now I'm reacting to your situation. But I want to be able to respond to you, because I understand that the anger is actually just masking a lot of the pain that you're going through beneath the surface. And we have to be emotionally intelligent enough to basically navigate our way through boundaries. I'll say that much, because sometimes when we have boundaries, we need to have soft consequences and hard consequences. What do I mean by that? So a soft consequence of that situation is, okay, you've projected your spirit of anger towards me, even though I've let you know that I don't want to engage in that kind of, activity. And I realized that you were trying to work on it. So what I'm going to do is just give you a few days. Okay, that would be a soft consequence. I'm going to give you a few days to kind of like just come to your own realizations. And generally speaking, it takes people roughly around about 3 to 4 days to come to realization, especially when they have done something where they are, I won't say in the wrong, but something where they've acted out of their usual nature of character. Potentially, if that's a person that is, very much a self-reflective kind of individual. It'll take them about 3 to 4 days to come to realization about how they've actually handled the situation. By day 5, you're like, okay, cool. I can come back into the space. We can have a conversation about it. We can, just digress deeper into what actually transpired with the situation, because a lot of the times when people regress into their trauma, they are regressing into a childlike state of themselves. They're regressing into that wound, which generally speaking will be very, very significant to a part of their life that would have been between the age of 0 to 7, because that's when our program of our subconscious mind is actually done. Anything else that transpires after that are basically core memories playing itself out as subpersonalities. This is why we go to therapy, basically to talk about the stuff that we are still holding on to, so that we can unpack the baggage of our past, so that we can unpack the baggage of our pain, our trauma. It's important to be able to have, okay, so a hard consequence in that kind of situation. If you've had the conversation with the person several times, you've told them time and time again, you've had your moment where you've taken your 5-day break, if you will, and nothing seems to be getting better because they just can't seem to overcome the challenge of this anger because it's very deep rooted in this individual. Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to need a relationship vacay because this isn't healthy for me. What do I mean by relationship vacay? This isn't a break. This is I'm going to have to reevaluate the dynamics of this relationship and see whether or not it's healthy for me to stay in this space. Because if you're going to continue to put your shadows out there, and trigger me and call me into the darkness of whatever trauma it is that you haven't necessarily dealt with, I'm going to need maybe like a good 3 to 4 months to just really sit and see how different my life would be without having to engage in that kind of activity with you, and how much I could personally grow by not having to actually engage in that kind of experience of you as well. And also it gives that person an opportunity to be able to go away and reflect for those 3 to 4 months and really, really go through a growth process, because it takes about 90 days for anybody to go through a transition. So within that 3 months, 4 months, they'll be able to go through a process of actually growing into the next version of themselves. And they will be able to see more of themselves. And by the time you get back into the space, you can then make, again, another judgment on, okay, is this going to be a safe environment for me? Can I allow for myself to be in this environment and trust that you can safeguard me from your own shadows, from your own demons and trauma? And can I sit in a space where I can be completely transparent with you, where we can just grow as individuals? That's what boundaries can actually do in relationships. It can give a person, people in general, an opportunity to grow together instead of growing apart. What happens a lot of the times is that people don't have boundaries. They don't have, these safeguarding firewalls in their relationships, and people keep stepping and treading on each other's toes as a result of that. And all of a sudden, now it's a case of, I don't know where I stand in the relationship because I've completely lost sight. Like, you have turned into someone that I don't know if I even like. I don't know if I want to continue to engage in any sort of relationship with you, because you've just completely gone so far out of your character, because you had no boundaries. You set no boundaries in place for this person. I'll explain to you what happens when we have no boundaries in place with a person. When you have no boundaries in place with a person, their demons feed off you, and they can literally just treat you like nothing. They can treat you like the lowest of low of low. They will basically treat you how they have been subjected to being treated. Hurt people, right? That's what happens when we have no boundaries in place. A boundary is put in place so that person knows that their pain is for them to be accountable for. They aren't supposed to hold you responsible for their pain. They're supposed to work on the trauma of their past. And that's what a boundary can do for a person. That's what a boundary can do for a relationship. Give people an opportunity to have a healthy relationship. Give people an opportunity to be able to take accountability for each other's wounds, their traumas, their demons, their shadows, whatever you want to call it. Okay. It gives a person an opportunity to know how to basically put into their accountability bank. Is this for me to take responsibility for? Yes. Is this for you to take responsibility for? Yes. That's what boundaries does. It gives people an opportunity to be able to have transparent relationships. And when you have a transparent relationship, guess what? There is no room for your demons to be able to show up, pop up, and make a surprise visit. And all of a sudden, this person's like, oh my God, who are you? You know, there's no room for that because the boundary had been set in place. What I would say is it's not so easy to just, meet someone and say, these are my, wounds, this is my boundary. It's not as simple as that. I think you have to kind of spend some time with a person, get to know a person, know your limits with that person, identify what is and isn't okay for you within that relationship. And that will then give you an opportunity to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm not willing to do. And, this is why I'm not willing to do it, because this is where it takes me back to. And I'm not willing to let the trauma of my past dictate my present or create more of that for my future. And because of that, this is why I feel as though I no longer want to continue to, I guess, engage in this kind of behavior with you. It's probably going to take, again, like I say, because there's a 90-day transition period with any relationship or any kind of engagement with a person. You kind of have to give it a full 90 days to be able to see, okay, what are these person's mannerisms? I'd probably even say give it a full 120 days. Why? Because after the 90 days of knowing that person, their mask comes off, you actually get to know them, you actually get to see them for who they really are. Then you can actually be able to make a valid decision on what your effective boundaries are going to be in place moving forward, especially in dynamics where we're speaking about friendships. If there's somebody that you are wanting to maintain a long-term friendship with, you need the first 190 to 120 days to basically learn more about that person, see more of who they are. And within that time frame, you're already building a list of things that you maybe aren't comfortable with about that person, things that you perhaps feel as though you dislike about the person. And those are the things that you basically do not want to engage in as far as your relationship with that person. Those are your boundaries. Okay, I know that you have a tendency to be selfish with your other friendship dynamics. That's not okay for me, because if I'm going to be giving you 80% in this friendship, I need to know that I'm getting reciprocity. I need to know that what I'm giving is also what I'm receiving. 80% is just not going to cut it for me. I need you to meet me halfway. Those are the things that can transpire from you. Firstly, taking an opportunity to get to know a person, giving them that 90 days for them to go through their transition of letting their mask go, because in most cases, as much as people want to say, I'm real, I'm real, I'm real, there are parts of themselves that they won't show you. Within that 90 days, there are parts of themselves that will start to be, I guess, seen, because you'll be able to start seeing more of them. You'll be able to start peeling back the layers of them. And you will be able to start to see and identify more of who they really are, instead of just a one facet version of them, a one dimensional experience of them. We're multifaceted beings. There's so many layers to us. And over the course of 90 to 120 days, you get to see as many layers of a person as you choose to, I guess, acknowledge and engage in. Now, another thing that tends to happen when we're speaking about boundaries is that people will go into situations and relationships, see red flags, choose to ignore those red flags, and then once the person actually goes full blown into a low vibrational reflection of themselves, it's like, but how could you do that to me? How could you treat me that way? Well, there were warning signs for you before you got to that place. Those warning signs were letting you know, okay, this is where you're supposed to be able to put some T's and C's in place to avoid this person's demon, their trauma, their wounds, their worry, basically triggering your own personal shadows, your own personal wounds and trauma. Should we invest 90 days? Is there a cheat sheet? To be fair, there is a cheat sheet. What I would say is within the first 30 to 45 days, the more honest you are about who you are, the more honest that person will be about who they are as well. And that means you being willing to be vulnerable enough. If you're vulnerable enough, that person will be able to open themselves up to you, which means that you don't have to spend the whole 90 days trying to peel back the layers. In most cases, people don't want to. Shadows are basically the parts of ourselves that we are dubious about sharing with the rest of the world, because we feel like we're going to be judged. Personally, because we're judging ourselves from those same aspects and facets of ourselves as well. But if you are openly honest with that person, they will actually put their walls down, they will take their guards down, and they will actually be able to be a little bit more honest with you as well. And it gives you an opportunity at that point to be able to make a conscious decision. Is this somebody that I want to be able to invest another 45 days into? Is this a relationship dynamic that I can see growing? And if not, be completely honest about that. Why? Because if you put yourself in a position where you know that a part of you is, not necessarily 100% engaged in the relationship of getting to know this person, you have a spirit of resentment that's attached to you. You're now resenting this person. The things that you dislike about them, that will slowly start to build. It will start to be a slow burner. And this is what happens a lot when people, build up. But how can you be vulnerable and give away information? For me personally, it's more a case of knowing the kind of person that you're dealing with. So if you are somebody that is dealing with a person who tends to be a little bit self-involved, you know that you can't give too much away in those types of dynamics. You kind of have to be, I said it before, you have to be emotionally intelligent when you're navigating through boundaries, because what you may do with one person may not be sufficient with another person, because everybody's different, and the way that you may engage with one person may not suffice for another relationship. What I would say is, when we're talking about being vulnerable, you have to be able to see that person. You have to be able to know within yourself, first and foremost. You have to be emotionally and intellectually intelligent enough to say, okay, is this worth me being able to be vulnerable to you? Are you the type of person, and again, red flags, are you the type of person to use this information and weaponize it against me and actually use my traumas of my past as something to trigger me moving forward? How do you know that? Basically, by reading between the lines of other relationship dynamics. If they've told you about other instances that they've had with other people, basically, if a person shows you who they are the first time, believe them, because you're learning about who that person is through their relationships with other people. And don't believe for a second, just because you have a good relationship with them today, they won't treat you in exactly the same way. If you're with a type of person basically that is someone to maybe gossip, for instance, know that the moment that your back is turned, that person is more than likely having discussions about you. They're more than likely saying not so nice things about you behind your back. Why? Because that's the nature of their character. That's just who they are as an individual, and you are not exempt from them being who they are around you. It's just that they may not be willing to be forthcoming with who they are for fear of judgment. So we have to be emotionally intelligent enough and practice healthy detachment, is what I'd say, guys. Healthy detachment is so key, because when we are too emotionally invested in a person, we choose not to see them, even though there are so many red flags and warning signs. What do I mean by that? So when I say that we choose not to see them, if we know that there's a person here who is somebody who is likely to be, for instance, romantic relationships. Not saying that, somebody that wants to cheat are always a cheater. What I would say is, if there is somebody that has exhibited infidelity in past relationships, know that this is a person that is working through trust issues. And it may not necessarily be anything whatsoever to do with you, but it may be situations from their past that they're working through. Because in most cases, when people sort of deal with, I guess, infidelity, it's insecurity. And insecurity stems from a place of trust issues. And it's like, okay, I don't feel safe with you. I don't feel secure with you. I don't feel like I'm comfortable to be vulnerable with you, because my insecurity is very, very much an overwhelming state at the minute. With those types of situations, it's really just for us to be able to accept a person as they are, as they come, as they appear. Try not to basically let our rose tinted glasses of our emotions and how we feel, our personal attachment towards that person, taint the image of them that we are receiving, because that information that we get within maybe the first 3 weeks is definitely going to be viable 3 months from now when they're doing the same thing that they did 3 weeks into getting to know that person. But now you're seeing a full-blown experience of it. But because you wanted to give them the benefit of your doubt, even though your doubt was saying, hey, this is a red flag, this is a warning sign for me, maybe I don't want to put myself in this situation, but you completely, discredit that. You kind of go through a process of giving this person the benefit of your doubt, and now they let you know that there was no need to give them the benefit. You were supposed to basically acknowledge your doubt, have a conversation about why your doubt is there, and see if you can peel back the layers and go deeper. Because like I said, a lot of the times people are projecting their own traumas, their own wounds and shadows, either consciously or subconsciously. And in most cases, because our subconscious is responsible for 95% of our reality and our creating, it's more than likely that they're creating from a subconscious part of themselves, and they don't realize that these sub personalities are actually manifesting through them. These old wounds are manifesting through them. How do you track 90 days interactions or 90-day span? I would say 90-day span. Why? Because in that 90 days, that person is basically building a sort of, how can I put it? They are now getting a little bit more comfortable with you within that 90 days. And as they get a little bit more comfortable with you, they'll be able to, I guess, peel back the layers a little bit more. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 90 interactions. It will be a 90-day span, because 90 days is a transition for any sort of relationship. It's really just giving them an opportunity to sort of show you who they are. And in today's society, like I said, we're in such a volatile time where people are so super super sensitive. It's so easy for people to get triggered, because I'm not going to say nobody, but majority of us aren't necessarily dealing with a lot of the past trauma, and we just continue to build and carry the baggage and carry the burdens of our past and offload that into new relationships, and we invest on new relationships as a result of that. And we kind of just have to, again, just learn how to take accountability for what we're bringing into our relationships, be it a colleague relationship, a friendship, a romantic relationship. We just have to be aware of who we are, aware of the past that we are basically carrying with us. Yes, our past does not define us, but guess what? There is a part of us that is still creating from that place, because that past trauma has created a core memory. That core memory has now infiltrated our belief system. And as a result, because we create from our belief systems, we're creating from a place where half the time we don't even know ourselves. I'll put it to you like this. There are situations that we get ourselves into. Okay, so for instance, when we go through situations maybe where we're navigating through feelings of jealousy, for instance, in relationships, that can go as far back to sibling rivalry. Sibling rivalry, being jealous of a sibling. I've struggled with making new friends, and I'm stuck in the familiarity friends of. Okay, what I'm sensing with making the new friends, it's more a case of like finding your right circle. And that's another thing as well. Like if somebody isn't necessarily, I'm not going to say right for you, because everybody is right for anybody. It's just basically finding what level you can maintain a friendship, and I'm putting my fingers in quotation marks, because they may just be more appropriate as an associate instead of the label of friend. Because to me, a friend like is really somebody that you engage in as far as like a life companionship, right? But when we're dealing with situations like those, we have to be okay to say, okay, I'm looking for my soul tribe when I'm speaking about friends. And I don't know that you particularly are somebody that I would be able to engage in a friendship with for the next 2 to 3 years, because I know that I'm busy working on myself and I'm constantly growing, and I'm very, very much open to evolving. And if that is a person that is very rigid, if that is a person that's very restricted, controlling excessively, it means that you're going to find it difficult to actually evolve in a friendship with this person, because they limit themselves a lot. They limit themselves on as a means to be able to protect themselves. Control is a survival mechanism. That's where it comes from. It stems from potentially even an environment where a child did not feel safe. And as a result, their adult version of themselves is now oversensitive and overprotective of every single aspect of their life. So they have a tendency to be super, super controlling, trying to control every facet just in case. It's like they're on the just in case auto drive, as I like to call it. You know, I need to be able to make sure that I'm controlling the dynamics of this situation just in case. But guess what? When we go into those just in case modes, we have self-fulfilling prophecies. Just because we thought that it was a possibility, it becomes an actuality. And those are some of the things that we have to be mindful of, because we are creating our reality subconsciously or consciously. And when we have subconscious thoughts, what is your age? I'm about to be 30 next month. Actually, been through a lot of life. I've had several lifetimes here. But I've learned a lot throughout the process of it, because as I continue to grow, I'm very open. I've let go of 20-year friendships because I needed to be able to grow, and that friendship was stagnating my growth because that person was, you know, kind of making it so that I had to basically wait for them to basically be willing to embrace the growth process. And it's like, I love you, but I love me too, and I need to be able to see how much more I can grow. And the only way that I can do that is to be able to disconnect from this cord, because it's becoming a burden. I'm now being held accountable for your inability to grow, and I can't, you know, hold myself back because of that. There's so much more that the world, I can't necessarily just say needs me for, but there's so much more that I need to be able to express of myself within the world, so that we can continue to collectively, you know, grow as mass consciousness. But boundaries are very, very important. Like, I've seen what not having boundaries in relationships can do, and I've seen what having boundaries in relationships can do. And for the most part, my boundaries in relationships, as I would recommend to anybody, I have boundaries in my relationships that I reevaluate, maybe depending on the dynamics of the relationship, maybe every couple of weeks, because we go through new moon and full moon cycles, and every new moon, and I do astrology as well, so every new moon and full moon basically triggers us, you know, depending on the dynamics, you know. Given your age, do you think there's a possibility you have courses like this for young adults? I'm trying to work on courses for young adults, because I've learned that a lot of people from my generation are very angry. We're a very angry generation because we're so sensitive to everything. But I am working on courses, because I think that, you know, it's easy for us to blame the world outside of ourselves, but the world is only a physical manifestation of our internal infestation. So whatever we're going through on the inside is going to manifest externally. But it's easier for us to blame the world outside of ourselves for everything, because then we don't have to take accountability. We don't have to be responsible. We don't actually have to hold ourselves accountable for the way that we're creating. So I'm working on it, but it's definitely a process. Aquarius, I'm an Aquarius Pisces cusp, actually. So good read there. Aquarius Pisces cusp, and it helps me to be able to, I guess, yeah, it helps me to be able to sort of see a little bit more into things, and get a little bit more clarity. I guess it's you know, Uranus rules Aquarius, so it gives me an opportunity to be very forward thinking in the way that I'm able to see things. But I definitely think that it's important for us to be able to just have open discussions. I don't think that why people get to, what I've learned, especially with my generation, is that why we get to a place of, you know, these angry versions of ourselves showing up is because we're not having open conversations. We're not saying, you know, so you believe astrology compatibility has an effect of when it comes to relationship? Absolutely, I do. Why I do is because our sun sign. So I said to you that I'm an Aquarius Pisces cusp. Our sun sign is only one facet of ourselves. That's the I guess, authentic representation of who we are, but we also have our ascendant sign, which is the version of ourselves that we project out into the world. This is basically how other people experience us. And even though I am an Aquarius Pisces cusp, as far as my sun sign, my Aquarius sign is Virgo, which is Pisces complete opposite. So people will actually experience me as the opposite to who I truly am a lot of the times. And I have to basically peel back the layers and just be completely honest about who I am. And I spent probably like the first 25 years of my life trying to meet other people's expectations and showing up as my Virgo nature, as my Virgo self, until I just decided that it was draining, it was tiring, projecting a version of myself that isn't actually the nature of my core being. Also in relationships, why I think that it's important in relationships is because how you engage with a person isn't just based on, like I said, their sun sign. It's also based on their ascendant sign. So your ascendant is basically the mask that you wear out into the world, and how a person's mask appears to you may not actually be who they really are, but that's just how they have become conditioned based on, I guess, the traumas, the wounds, the demons, whatever they have been through in life that has conditioned them to become that version of themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are getting a complete representation of them or even an authentic representation of them. This is just how they have, I guess, learn how to survive in the wild life. Living in full evolution is a very, very challenging thing. It's a very difficult process to navigate through, and transparency is key. And that's what boundaries do. It gives us an opportunity to, like I say, protect ourselves from other people's shadows, but also protect ourselves from our own shadows. Because a lot of the times when we go into situations where we're acting out of character, we don't even realize that we could have, avoided going down that path just by putting a couple of steps into place before getting to that place where we're acting out of our character, before getting to that place where we're reacting instead of responding to situations. This is what happens a lot in today's society. People are too busy reacting to the situations that they're faced with instead of responding. When you respond, you can actually stay in your character. You don't then have to, project your triggered reaction at that person. You can actually just be who you are and just speak. Speak instead of having these low vibrational forces or reflections, entities, wounds, traumas of yourself speak on your behalf. Anger is only a surface emotion at the end of the day. Anger is basically saying, I've gone through a lot, and right now I have put myself in situations where I have basically allowed for myself to get to a place where I'm just going to disrespect myself. Because in most cases, when I see people go into anger, I see that there's a part of themselves that has been violated, that has been disrespected. And because of that, they're now choosing to disrespect other people so that they can ease the pain of that hurt, so that they can ease the pain of that disrespect. And it doesn't make it right, again, but it's just a survival mechanism. It's just something that people do to basically make themselves feel better. And to some extent, it actually does, because now they aren't the only person basically that the spirit of anger is feeding off. Now the spirit of anger has infested another vessel. Now the spirit of anger has taken over another vessel. And now they are coming down off the vibration of that anger, and they can see a little bit more clarity. It's kind of like how people say when they get really, really significantly angry, they see red. Guess what? They are seeing what is in their root chakra, or the unhealed trauma that they haven't addressed from their root chakra, which is why they're seeing red, because red is reference to the root chakra. So this is all the pain that they've been carrying around, that they have had as suppressed, pent up frustration and anger. And this is how it's manifesting. This is how it's showing itself. But because there was no effective boundaries put in place, this person didn't know how to protect themselves from their own shadows, from their own demons. They just got to a place where now they are bleeding all over people that did not cut them, because that wound has cut them so deep, and they don't know how to actually go deep within themselves to address the wounds of their past trauma. Like, I even to like give an example of vulnerability, just to even put it out there, because I'm a completely open book. I had a conversation with myself today, with my 4-year-old version of myself who is dealing with feelings of worthlessness because of abandonment issues from an absentee father. And I gave myself a hug. I cried out her pain. I let her know that it had nothing to do with her and everything to do with an adult who was basically trying to learn how to keep their own promises to themselves first and foremost. And it had nothing to do with the fact that he was practically incapable of keeping a promise to her. It was just more that he wasn't disciplined enough within himself to be able to keep a promise to himself. So she doesn't have to, be accountable for the pains of his past. All she can do is take accountability for how his pains and how his traumas has subsequently impacted her and how she's become collateral damage to an experience of him, basically. And I had to have that conversation with that 4-year-old version of myself, because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to heal from this feeling of worthlessness that she continues to perpetuate in relationships. And I could very easily make it about the person that triggered that part of myself and say that they're a bad person for doing exactly what he did. But the reality is that already existed within me. It was a core memory. It was a core memory that created a belief system that was all that I was worthy of. And now I have to work every single day. I work every single day tirelessly to continue to evolve my consciousness and give my consciousness an opportunity to grow and expand itself, so that the generations of my lineage beyond me does not have to be subjected to the same pain of past traumas within our lineage, and so that the people that experience me can experience the authentic nature of who I am, not the mask. Like it's so tiring wearing a mask. I don't think people like really understand what it does to the spirit. I'm a I'm fourth generation, actually. I'm fourth generation psychic. So I see people's spirit and I see how detrimental certain situations actually have and impact a person's spirit and the core of their essence. And being able to be in situations, I love that gift. I love that gift because first and foremost, I can only see a person's shadow by seeing more of my own shadows. The only way that I can read a person is knowing more about my own self, which is why I work so tirelessly on myself, because I need to be able to see more of myself so that I can open myself up to more of other people who aren't necessarily aware of what they're carrying, the baggage of the burdens that they're shouldering as a result of their past traumas. Like, it's very, very important, because if we don't have boundaries in place, then what I could have done in that situation, like I said, make my wound somebody else's problem. And that's what boundaries do. Boundaries help to safeguard us so that we don't have to take on the other person's I guess issues, and also they don't then also have to take on our own issues. Everybody in that relationship can just come to the place where we can find peace within ourselves by being accountable for what we bring to the table. And if you are in a situation where, people aren't necessarily accountable, the scales aren't balanced. Unfortunately, that's the reality. The scales aren't balanced, and you will be fed off of by a narcissist, because one of the main things with a narcissistic trait and tendency, and we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies, is just for us to be able to identify how it's manifesting through us. But what will happen in those dynamics is that we will continue to be told that they are a victim of us and we are the reason why they can't do certain things in their lives, because they're busy telling this victim story in their mind. Because narcissists, they aren't born that way. They're created by their circumstances. And a lot of the times, narcissists are people that have felt rejected, neglected, abandoned, and abused. And we kind of have to be willing to understand the journey that these people have walked in their lives that has conditioned them to become this version of themselves that we're experiencing. Being a narcissist doesn't necessarily make a person a bad person. It just means that they're a wounded person. They're a very, dark person because of the reality that they've experienced, because I hear people speak a lot, and it's always very negative talks about, the narcissist. And I'm not here to kind of like tell anybody to go and engage in a relationship with a narcissist, because it's actually very, very unhealthy. But the only way to actually disengage from a relationship with a narcissist is to be able to see the narcissist within your own self, because we are all reflections of each other, and whatever that person is exhibiting lies somewhere within you. It is a shadow somewhere within yourself, but because you refuse to see it within yourself, the universe has brought an external representation of that in as a mirror reflection for you to actually see yourself and actually see what you look like. And then at that point, it's up to you to take accountability and say, okay, maybe I actually do need to work on this situation. Maybe I actually do need to take the opportunity to grow and evolve from this situation, because it is doing something to my soul. I can tell that it's leaving me stagnant. The more I want to grow, the less capable I feel because of the weight that I'm carrying. I'm carrying too many crosses. Basically, I'm carrying too many crosses of my past, of my parents' past, of their parents' like, what parents as well don't actually realize is that their children will actually live out their reality. We're kind of like a 2.0 version of our parents. And if they aren't completely, I guess, honest with themselves about the reality of their experiences, because everything for us coming in as sponges is learned and taught behavior, we will just live out the same reality, unless we are willing to be conscious enough. And thankfully, we're in, the age of Aquarius, the information age, where people are actually just getting so many amazing divine downloads, where spirit is just speaking to everyone. Not everybody's willing to listen. Not everybody's willing to listen, but spirit is speaking to everyone. And it gives us an opportunity to either embrace our healing or choose to be a victim to the lessons that we're learning. Because I noticed with our, I guess, society today, we're so open to the blessings, when we are getting, I guess, when we're getting something, it feels like something nice, basically, but I'm also equally as grateful for my lessons, because my lessons are going to make me a greater person. They're going to make me a greater reflection of myself. It's going to teach me how to set better boundaries for myself moving forward. What I learned from this Cancer full moon eclipse that we just had last Friday has now given me the space to be able to move forward and say, okay, it is important for me to be able to safeguard the 4-year-old version of myself who feels as though she's been through so much in life, that is scared of being neglected, that is scared of being abandoned. I don't want to, continue to perpetuate a cycle of her living in fear, but I want to let her know that basically somebody's got her back. What we don't take an opportunity to do today in today's society is parent ourselves. Okay, so our parents, they did the best that they could, and it's not going to be the be all and end all of everything that we would have wanted for ourselves. But if we want it, then we just got to create it. That's the reality. They did the best that they could, and if it's not good enough for you, do something else. Do what you need, do what you felt like you would have liked with the situation, which is why I mentioned that I literally sat with myself today and had a conversation with her and that 4-year-old version of myself, and let her know that we're going to be able to do work collectively moving forward. And I will teach you your worth and let you know that you are so great. It's not even about anybody having to abandon you. Like, it's just about us, me, and that 4-year-old version of myself being able to take accountability for ourselves and just being companions to each other. Because a lot of the times, we'll go through things as children and we tell ourselves this false narrative that it hasn't affected us. We aren't impacted by it until it starts playing out through our psyche subconsciously. We have no idea where these patterns are coming from. And we don't know how to actually manifest our way through it, because we aren't necessarily, these aren't things that they teach in schools. They don't teach us how we manifest. They don't teach us that 95% of our manifesting actually takes place subconsciously. And they don't teach us how to be able to become a little bit more consciously aware, how to navigate through our subconscious mind, how to tap into our subconscious mind. Make an ebook. I will. I'm trying to be able to, because words are very dense. It's probably a little bit easier for me to be able to just engage in a conversation. So I'll probably do like a video format of teaching the information, but it's very, very important because there are so many people that are just, being fed to their shadows. They don't know what parts of themselves are manifesting, and they feel lost, they feel wounded, they feel like nobody cares about them. And to some extent, that is the reality that they feel that they have experienced. So I'm not here to discredit anybody's story, but what I want to let a person know is that even if nobody else has been there for you, you can be there for you. You can be everything that you wanted in another person, and you don't have to place your expectations on something outside of yourself, because you have all of the power within yourself to fulfill that within yourself with conviction. With conviction, like, we go to therapists. Don't get me, like, I actually I'm a counselor as well. I'm a life coach and counselor. But I don't, for me, when I do work with my clientele, I it's not about keeping them, reliant on me. It's about getting them to do the work for themselves. It's about getting them to that place where they are self-sufficient enough, where they are at a point of self-counseling, where it's more of a case of them catching up with me and saying, hey, this is what transpired for me in the last week or so, and I could see what part of myself, what shadow within me was perpetuating that cycle, and now we're working together to be able to navigate our way through it. Because a lot of the times, like, people don't want to go to therapy, for one, because they're scared. I'm going to say that. They are very, very scared about what therapy is going to unfold, and how they're going to unravel throughout the therapeutic process. And then another aspect of it is that it's costly, and it leaves them reliant on someone outside of themselves. Um, I don't it is expensive. Absolutely. Absolutely, Ralph. It is very, very expensive, which is why I don't, I let people know whenever they work with me, it's not a case of you being reliant on me by any means. And I am not here to provide you with a codependent relationship, because I do not want you as a dependent on me. You have the power all within yourself to be able to heal yourself. I am simply sent as a vessel to be able to assist you with your process, because there are parts of yourself that you cannot yet see. But I am going to help you to engage in, moving and navigating through your subconscious mind, so that you can free flow through your subconscious mind and identify what parts of yourself are creating what aspects of your reality, and why. Because when we don't have boundaries in place, our demons, our, trauma, it just uses us. It uses us. And this is where we become powerless to it. And we almost kind of fall victim, I guess, to the process. And we don't then, it feels like we always have to be apologetic after the facts. We then go into engaging in contracts with the spirit of guilt, because we do some stuff that's out of our character, and now we feel bad because that's not in our natural nature to be that way. But that's because we're busy wearing masks, and we believe the masks that we feed to other people. But the least that we can do for ourselves is know that that mask is not our true nature. It's not the true essence of our core being. A lot of the times when I even sit into, I guess, spaces with people, there are a lot of us that has so many, how can I put it? Suppressed memories. I like to call them archived files, because I've done that, found apologizing for nothing during therapy. Absolutely. Absolutely. Some things need to be dealt with by a spiritual source. And so me therapists aren't equipped. Absolutely. That is the reality. And this is what I say to people, like, I cannot fill your void for you. For me personally, I tell people all the time, like, when I go within myself, I utilize my connection with God. I utilize that source of creativity, that source of life, to be able to fill me up in ways that I have been depleted, in ways that I have been taken from, in ways where it feels like my cup has been poured to the point where I'm almost empty. And it is a case of us being able to, that brings me to Minister Anthony. I was actually going to say that, it's about us being able to utilize our angels and guides as well. people aren't equipped to feed, can't restore people to spiritual healing. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the reality, because what I find is that a lot of people want to feed their ego. They want to be able to say, I'm going to save you. And it's like, no, you're not going to save me. God's going to save me first and foremost. You are just going to be a vessel that he works through to be able to get me to a place where I'm willing to receive my saving grace through God, and that's where the reality of the situation is a little bit different. But people want to be able to feed their own ego in the process as well. They want to be able to say, I'm the reason you did this. And I never take credit for anybody's growth. I'm always like, so how do you feel about the fact that you've managed to do this for yourself? How does it feel to know that you had the capacity, the capability, the strength all along to be able to get yourself to this place? And sometimes when they're going through certain things, I can't be the one to get them out. All I can do is advise them, okay, you may need Archangel Michael to assist you with this because you need serious protection beyond what I can do for you. I can send prayers out there on your behalf. I can, put positive intentions over your space, but you need to be able to utilize your angels and guides because they are there for a reason. But in today's day and age, there are so many guides, there's so many angels that are just unemployed because people choose not to use them. People are fixed on their ego's perspective, assuming that they're the ones that are going to save themselves. And it's like, okay, but you realize that you're not having a warfare with a physical representation here. You're having a warfare with a spiritual entity. This is spiritual warfare that we're navigating through. So the only thing really that we can utilize to be able to fight a dark shadow is a light entity to be able to navigate through the process of what we're going through. And a lot of the times it's very, very challenging because people want to be able to just engage in this 3D reality and tell themselves that this is all that exists. And it's very, I guess, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to let people know that, okay, what you're navigating through, like there's a spirit that's attached to you, but this spirit is attached to you through this person or through that person, or, it's attached to you through your lineage. This is something that is karmic for your lineage, and your lineage has been navigating through this for years. It's difficult to really explain these things to people because they just want to blame the person. They want to blame somebody. They just want to blame somebody. And I'm like, you have to realize that there are dark forces, there are dark entities that are using people as vessels to be able to fulfill their purpose, what they intend to do. Like I mentioned earlier, the spirit of anger, it's bound to trigger the other person in the room because it wants to be able to feed off as many people as possible and get as many people into the vibration of anger as possible so that it can continue to feed itself. But for the most part, we don't necessarily want to openly have these discussions because it's like, you must have light of God in you. That is thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Anthony. I think I've worked on embodying God's light within my life, and I've worked on making sure that whatever I do is with God's purpose over my life. And there was a point in my life where I was navigating through wanting to be someone in life, and I was doing it without God, and guess what? Nothing good was coming from it. Nothing worthy was coming from it. It wasn't. I had to go through last year. God said to me last year, bringing in the year, that I was going to use you to minister. And I was, because I'm dealing with basically feelings of lack of self-worth that's attached to my lineage. There was a part of me that was just very, very humbled by the experience of that. And also I didn't know how to take that because a part of me didn't feel worthy of it. And now, if we can take an opportunity to just open ourselves up to knowing that there is a greater source out there that really actually does want to use us, what we need to do is to be able to set effective boundaries in place. Because what happens a lot of the times is that other people's spirits attach themselves to us so that they can feed. And that's because we have no boundaries. That's because we don't know our worth. That's what God took me through last year. God took me through learning my self-worth. And it wasn't about any physical, value. It was more about the spiritual value and understanding what one could do with the spirit that I had. And by understanding the nature of that, I was able to, start acknowledging that it's about living in purpose. That's what makes a person feel worthy. That's where a person's worth really comes from, because God has an intention for each and every vessel that he creates, and it's really just for us to be able to identify what our purpose is, and it's the only way for us to be able to really stay true to who we are is to just set effective boundaries in place for ourselves. The darkness around you will transgress against the light that expose the evil within the darkness. Absolutely. I've lost friends, family members, people want to tell themselves a lie. And if, I want to tell the truth hurts. And then these entities want to be able to attack. And I'm not going to engage in that kind of reality. I don't need to engage in it. If you aren't willing to keep your dark forces in check just as much as I work on my dark forces, then it's not a healthy space for me to be in. And I will recommend that to anyone, because what's happening a lot today is that we're just letting ourselves be eaten alive by these vessels of darkness, unfortunately, because they aren't aware of how they're being used. They aren't consciously aware of how they're being used. And as a result, it is really just bleeding into people that have not cut them. These wounds are so deep that it's bleeding over into other relationships as well. And it's not safe. It's not safe. And why it's important for us to be able to set boundaries in place for ourselves is because those people will then be able to learn. We don't ever change anyone. And that's something that I had to go through a process of learning. We simply inspire people to change themselves by changing ourselves. And it's just, there's a book called The Trinity of God in Man by Anthony Walker. And this book, Quicken the Spiritual Mind. I love that. I love that. Guys, you heard it out there. The book is called Trinity of God in Man by Anthony Walker. Just to help you guys kind of go through the evolution process. It speeds up the process, because if we can tap into our spirit, the evolution process for us is actually so much more effortless. It's a lot quicker. And it's something that can actually allow for us to be able to do our work here and continue to be channels of light against the dark forces that so many of our friends and family have, I wouldn't even say fall victim to, because it's a choice. I'm not going to lie, it is a choice. And they have to make those decisions to not engage in those types of spirits anymore. But without boundaries, without us setting boundaries in place for ourselves, then unfortunately, it's just, we fall, I guess, as collateral damage to those forces as well. Those forces get to feed off us, and we go into low vibrational reflections of ourselves. Next thing you know, we've lost ourselves. We don't even know who we are. And that's because we really actually aren't ourselves. Like, there's a spirit that's attached to our ego, and that spirit that's attached to our ego is now using the vessel to manifest through the vessel. This is why boundaries are important, so that we don't have to take on the projections of other people. Because when we take on the projections of somebody else, if they aren't even aware that they are projecting a dark entity, a dark spirit, a dark force, it's very, very detrimental to us. Because what the demons, I guess, don't tell us when we go into contracts, because they're counting on the fact that we are emotionally attached to these people. And this is how a lot of these entities work through people to be able to manipulate us and draw us in. And this is why boundaries are important in our relationships. What they don't tell us is that if we hold on to our contracts with these demons, if we hold on to our contracts with these traumas, these entities that are working through people, it will cause physical manifestation of illnesses. There are so many women out here that are dealing with cysts on their ovaries, for instance, fibroids in their womb. Why? Because they have serious mummy issues. They have serious daddy issues. And there is an entity that is physically manifesting as an ailment as a result of that. And that entity is growing because it is feeding off the flesh. It's feeding off their avatar. It's feeding off their vessel. And because of that, they're no longer in a place where they're able to really just, identify who they are, because they're no longer themselves. They actually are no longer themselves. Now, the inner child has taken over and they're in a position where it feels as though, okay, how do I make my way through this situation? How do I navigate through this? Guess what? The only way to do so is to be able to go back and heal the trauma of that past. You have to, because we are interdimensional beings, we assume that the present reality that we're engaging in is the only, I guess, time that is relevant, but it's not necessarily the case, because everything before now has conditioned us to the person that we are today, the people that we are today. And we have to be mindfully aware of that as we navigate through the process moving forward, because it will continue to create the person that we're going to be tomorrow, and 3 months from now, and 6 months from now, 9 months from now. We are constantly creating who we are, and the conditions of our environment will basically dictate the outcome of our personality. We have to be aware of that. And if we aren't, the reality is that we will become collateral to somebody else's. Okay. Talk about how I evaluate relationships every 2 weeks. So, for instance, what I learned with this Cancer full moon eclipse, um, is that 4-year-old girl within me doesn't feel comfortable being, she doesn't feel comfortable being in situations where she feels vulnerable to abandonment issues. So, what I do now moving forward, I'm very clear, like, I need for my friends, I need for anybody that is going to have any sort of affiliation with me to have complete transparency. Um, Communication is going to be key for me. If you aren't able to, if we make plans and you need to cancel, that's fine. I can address that 4-year-old girl within me. Um, but I can't do so if you're just going to not let me know about the fact that your plans have changed. And I will give someone, it's not even a three strike situation. I will give someone, I guess, soft boundaries with those types of situation, and hard boundaries. So if you have basically stood me up as a friend or a romantic situation, whatever, with no explanation, no contact, no nothing, I'm basically letting you know at this point that there is no engaging in making any plans for at least the next 10 to 12 days, because I need that time to be able to heal from the trauma of what you have just triggered to come to surface within me. I'm grateful for the fact that you've triggered it, absolutely, because it existed within me before you. And I also know that you are somebody that is navigating your way through patterns and sequence of unreliable tendencies and traits that you have, right? But as you learn how to work on your tendency to be unreliable, I'm going to learn to work on my tendency to be too available. Basically, I'm going to learn to work on my tendency to be too available. And in doing so, for the next 10 to 12 days, we can't engage in any sort of, I guess, scheduling of whatever meeting was supposed to take place, whatever engagement was supposed to take place. After that, 10 to 12 days, then we can sit down, have a discussion. We'll be able to sort of unpack and see how much we've learned. It's very important to be able to have open conversations with that person. A hard boundary for me in that situation is if somebody has done that to me several times. Now I'm just going to have to go in relationship vacay. I'm going to have to check out of this relationship for a while. I'm going to have to check out of this relationship for a while, because it's not safe. It's not a healthy environment for my demons. You're just going to continue to trigger me left, right, and center. And it's clear that you don't care, because you aren't actually aware of what is going on with the situation with yourself. You aren't aware that you have unreliable traits and tendencies that you need to work on. But I'm going to first and foremost acknowledge that that's the entity that you're working through, unreliability. And I'm going to work on my tendency to be, like I said, too available. In that 10 to 12 days, if it's a soft boundary, I'm not emotionally available to you. We're not having any sort of contact. This is your time. It's kind of like a small timeout. I absolutely do tell them. I absolutely do tell them. It's important for me to tell them. Why? Because then they are letting letting them know where they stand with me. If I choose not to tell them, now I'm perpetuating my wounds of fear of abandonment and neglect, and I wouldn't want to make someone feel how I wouldn't want to feel. So I have to let them know, hey, by the way, you did this the other day and it didn't, honestly. Because people can be quite defensive. So in order for me to have an open discussion with them where their guards are down, where their demons aren't easily triggered, what I do say to that individual is, I'm like, can we have an honest discussion? And in most cases, they will let me know whether or not they're open to having that honest discussion because they know what's about to come next. We're about to have an open, frank discussion. We're about to have an adult discussion, basically, because it's necessary. It's necessary to be able to move forward. And when I have the conversations with them, they are able to get so much more clarity on their own issues themselves as well. And it makes for us to be able to have a healthy relationship moving forward. Sometimes distance and space is healthy in relationships because there's some work that needs to be done separately and individually, and there's some work that has to be done collectively together, i.e., when you are triggered by that individual, and those triggers are important as well. But I would absolutely let them know. I wouldn't say anything as well. It's important that I don't let them know whilst I'm in the heat of the moment, because my wound, my trauma will basically speak on my behalf. So I don't engage in it in that moment per se. What I will do is take a good couple of hours to come down from the situation, and then I will revisit and engage in having a conversation with them and let them know where I stand. Because in most cases, if you go directly into it, then your emotions are using you and you are going to be speaking from a place of your hurt. So I'll take a couple of hours or so to just come down from the situation, maybe even a day, and say, okay, do you know what? When you did this situation last time, it didn't make me feel safe. It didn't make me feel comfortable. And as a result of that, I'm gonna need a few days. Like, I can tell that my child within me has been triggered, and she's gonna need some time to be able to come back from that and feel safe in this environment again. And it's just about having those open conversations and open dialogue with people. Transparency is how we keep our demons in check, guys. But people feel, because we're so busy judging our demons, that's another thing. Like, I don't judge any parts of my demons. Like, I understand that they have conditioned me to the person that I've become today. So it's important that I just take an opportunity to understand them. And the only way that, my demons are going to be completely honest with me, and other people's demons, because I hear other people's, I guess, demons' thoughts as well. They tell me things, things that people suppress a lot of the times, and I help them to be able to bring that to surface. But if they are in a position where if I'm not willing to, engage in how my inner child feels, then who else is going to actually have her back? Like, nobody else knows how you feel like you do. And only you can. As much as I'm psychic, I can tell a person about what I see in terms of, the journey that has unfolded in their past. But I also acknowledge to them, like, I don't actually know the full ramifications of what you've been through and how much it has impacted you. Only you know the journey that you have walked till today. And because of that, it's important that you take the time to be able to do the work that's necessary. It's important that you take the time to be able to work on the healing that needs to take place. And guess what? Telling that person, you're doing them a favor as well, by the way. You do them a favor because they are in a position where they can learn something about themselves. Like I said, 95% of our creating process happens subconsciously. So a lot of these people do not even know how they're creating these things. But by you even highlighting it, it gives them an opportunity to free themselves from that contract, if they should so choose. I will say that much. If they should so choose, because if they choose not to, then they stay victim and they continue to perpetuate the same cycle of the past things that they've kind of done, the past behaviors that they've exhibited, the past attitudes that they've basically engaged in as a result of those wounds. For those relationships, starting out by telling them things that make you vulnerable, doesn't that open up the chance of manipulation and showing you a full side of them? Absolutely. I will say that absolutely. And again, this is what I mean. Like, this is where our emotional intelligence comes in. when I do work with people, it's not about what people say, it's about what they don't say. That's what a people's demons are. It's the things that they don't say, it's the shadows. So, for instance, if a person is, you know, I've had people that have basically spoken about, issues in their past relationships, issues in their past romantic relationships. And they aren't aware of how deep that goes because they can't see the sequence of the pattern that is being perpetuated. So you have to read in between the lines. It's not about what a person says, it's about what they don't say. And the things that they don't say says so much more about that person because that is the true essence of who they are. A lot of the things that people say is for the purpose of building an image that they want you to accept, a mask that they want to wear so that they can feel comfortable with you, until they feel comfortable enough to actually take off that mask. So within that 90-day span of getting to know someone, I would definitely just recommend like read in between the lines. It's not about what a person says, it's about what they don't say, what their body language says instead. And what you can intuitively pick up on because like I say that I'm fourth generation psychic, but we're all psychic. Some people are just more attuned than others. It's how we communicate every single day of our experiences. Your intuition is there for a reason. Your guides, your angels are there for a reason and they're there to be used. I actually was only able to tap into my gift in the last few, I want to say like 4, 5, maybe even 6 years. Yes, listen to what you're shown. Don't ignore what your gut tells you. Absolutely, you have to because your gut is a neurological pathway to information as well. That's your intuition speaking directly to you to say, "Hey, this is a red flag. If you go down this road, it's not going to be nice for you." And it's important that you honor that because that is your avatar. That is your because people say that we have this whole empath and not situation going on at the minute, but we're all empaths as well. Again, some people are just more attuned than others. The avatar, the human vessel, is actually the empath. And it's always speaking to us, it's always telling us things, it's always trying to communicate to us, but because we're so busy living in our head and we're detached from our body, we don't take the time to be able to just work through the things that are showing up. I heard that those that experience quotes butterflies in the stomach when meeting a person, that's a sign that there's something wrong and not love. It can be it's you have to read in between because I'll say this, there's good butterflies and there's not so good butterflies. I won't call it bad because the universe doesn't see anything as bad. There's just negative, and negative is more of a takeaway. So the negative butterflies is basically, okay, this person is going to teach me a lesson. This person is going to teach me a lesson. The good butterflies or the positive butterflies that we would like to engage in is more, okay, I'm going to be able to grow with this person, I'm going to be able to expand. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get lessons, but it just means that it's more of a soul connection where you are effortlessly engaging in a experience with this person. It's effortless. It feels like your souls have known each other from past lives. Those would be positive butterflies. Negative butterflies would be the red flag warning signs where you're just like, I know that this person is no good for me, but I'm just going to dip my toe in anyways and hope for the best. And sometimes that person, in most cases, I want to say 80 to 90% of those cases, that person will disappoint you because you knew what you were getting yourself into beforehand. And the key is to not fall victim to the things that we've created, guys. That's the main thing that I'd say about setting boundaries. We have to be able to set boundaries in place with ourselves first and foremost and not fall victim to the things that we have created because we created the reality of it. And there's a reason why we created the reality of it, to teach us something about ourselves. We talk a lot, I guess, in today's society about being the spiritual being, having this earthly human experience, but we really have to like understand the embodiment of what that means. Like, we are learning more about the spirit that we are by playing out these roles within our human experiences, and we cast people in roles all the time. that's another thing as well, because words are very powerful. Like I said, we all have like self-fulfilling prophecies. If we're people that are very pessimistic and is all about the negative self-talk, they will go through a process of basically just talking themselves out of a blessing. Because one, they don't feel worthy, but also it's something that is deep within their psyche that is feeding off their positivity and they don't realize it. And it's not healthy. They have to be able to be willing to be honest enough with themselves to say, this is where I am with the situation. Boundaries for us, first and foremost, has to be set with ourselves. It's basically us learning ourselves and seeing what are, what we will and will not put up with, for one, like what are deal breakers for us in relationships, and what are things that we're willing to work on, you know what are some of the things that we feel as though, and again, like I said, when I talk about relationships, it's not just romantic relationships. We have so many different relationships. We have friendships. Having conversations with you guys in this space, like this is a congregation of a spiritual community. This is a relationship that we're formulating here, and we have to be able to go through the process of knowing who we are before we can even set any boundaries in place for anybody else. And this is why I say to you, Ralph, that I go through evaluating my relationships every couple of weeks, because every couple of weeks there's a new moon and a full moon that is going to trigger something else to come to surface, and I learn a little bit more about myself. And as I learn a little bit more about this spirit that is having this human experience, I let people know, okay, my spirit is not engaging in this type of behavior or experience anymore, because we've evolved. We've done work in the last couple of weeks, and since the last new moon or full moon, this is where we are on the journey. And I hope that you can join me at this destination of where I am on the journey and engage in a new kind of reality of me, where I can also engage in a new experience of you. We're constantly casting each other in roles. And it works in a way of, people talk about mummy issues and daddy issues and stuff like that. So if a person in a romantic relationship, just for Pete's sake, hi Kamal, if a person in a romantic relationship isn't aware of the mummy issues or daddy issues that they have, they don't know how those issues are going to overflow into their romantic relationships. And as those things start to show up, as those things start to transpire, it's really just giving us an opportunity to be able to see more of ourselves. But we can either choose to see ourselves in those situations, or we could just say, oh my God, that person was horrible to me. This is what happens a lot of the times as well, when people kind of have this type, as they put it, putting my fingers in quotation mark, because the type that people are referring to is a pattern. That's what they mean when they say, oh, this is usually my type. They have a pattern, and unless they are willing to disrupt the sequence of that pattern, they will continue to have the same outcome. It's like that whole saying, only a crazy person continues to do the same thing expecting different results. Absolutely, because you know what the outcome of the situation is going to be. You have to alternate the pattern. You have to basically switch up the different waves of the pattern that you are experiencing, because every new moon and full moon, we're experiencing different waves of energies. We're experiencing different vibrations that are coming through for us to navigate our way through. And sometimes some waves are bigger than others. Some waves are more emotional than others. Some waves, they trigger wounds that are deeper than others. And we have to be aware of these things so that we can navigate through the process. But I think it's important to have open conversation and open dialogue. That's what I'd say. Always, 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 because guess what? If you don't tell the other person, they actually just don't know. They don't know that they've offended you. They don't know that they've made you feel a certain type of way. And you don't have to do it to make them responsible for your feelings. It's just like, hey, like, I'm aware that this is something that I'm working on, but as I try to work on it, I don't need for you to continue to like abuse me by triggering it over and over and over again. That's just me putting myself in a position of self-abuse, and I don't intend to abuse myself. I'm actually trying to work on helping and healing myself and restoring myself at this point in life. It's just really us having that open conversation with the people around us. And also, I'm going to say this: if we can't have the open conversations that we want with the people around us, we have to be patient. I'm going to say that much. Like, we can't just go into the space now and expect people that we've been engaging in relationships with for the last 20 to 30 years to just become accustomed to our new way of being, because that's not realistic, unfortunately. They have become accustomed to the way that we have allowed them to treat us, the way that we have enabled their behavior for the last several years. They've become accustomed to that. So now they have to learn how to break that habit and formulate a new habit. And that's going to take some time. It takes 21 days to unlearn something, and it takes 90 days of consistency to be able to learn something new. So they're going through a process of 111 days before they can actually get to a place of showing you that they have grown, that they have evolved, that they have taken a personal interest in this new person that you are becoming. Well, the subject is how to set effective boundaries in our relationship. We're talking about boundaries because we don't do it enough, and then we get mad when people don't respect us because we don't respect ourselves enough to say what we need. We don't respect ourselves enough to say, if you do this to me, it's going to make me feel this type of way, and I don't want to go into that character. I don't want to go into that version of myself. And this is what I mean when I say that we cast each other in different roles, because what's meaning the boundaries. Okay, so I explained earlier, Kamal, that boundaries are basically firewalls. They are safety blankets basically for us in relationships. These are basically just terms and conditions, if you will. We get them when we go to a job. We have terms and conditions where we have to sign a contract when we go to a job. We should feel no way to be able to embark on a contract. I don't call it a contract because a contract is one-sided for one person's gain only. A contract with a person means that both parties are, engaging in this kind of agreement. Basically, they're engaging in this kind of agreement to be able to provide a healthy relationship. But boundaries are basically just putting terms and conditions in place of how you expect to be treated in that relationship. And it's important because people are only going to treat you how they treat themselves. And sometimes some people are very cruel to themselves and they don't know why, because they don't realize they're perpetuating past cycles of hurt. We have to, again, honesty is key and transparency is important because this is how they learn about themselves through us. This is why relationships are so important. I guess if relationships weren't necessary, spirit would only have like one of itself and nobody else would need to exist because that's perfection, right? But that's not the truth. We have so many different people that embody so many different variations, and they bring out different facets of ourselves, and they allow for us to show different aspects and reflections of ourselves, because relationships are what we're here to learn about ourselves from. The more we engage in relationships, the more we learn about ourselves. The way that we are in one relationship, margin of relationship, there are so many different types of relationship. There is romantic relationships, so there's dating in romantic relationships. There's for instance, engagements in romantic relationships. There are marriage in romantic relationships. There's friendships, there are business partnerships, there are relativeships, there are parentships. We all have so many different ships, and it's difficult to navigate all of these different ships, and we have to be mindfully aware, because what may happen in one ship, so we may have a situation in our friendship outside of work, and that person may have just basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, they may have just rubbed us the wrong way. And we take that into our work situation, and now we're like bringing the mad, the angry, the frustration into our workplace because we haven't addressed the energy of that frustration in the friendship. We have to decompartmentalize, and that's what boundaries are for. Boundaries gives us an opportunity to decompartmentalize and practice healthy detachment in our relationships, safeguarding ourselves first and foremost, and also giving other people an opportunity to be protected from our own wounds, our own traumas, our own shadows and demons, because that's what a boundary does. It basically lets a demon know, okay, if you go past this mark, you're just going to get a completely different reaction from me. I'm going to come out of my character. You're going to trigger my demons, and it's just going to be a clash of the egos as a result of that. And we want to try as much as possible to avoid that. So this is what we're going to do. These conversations, we need to practice having more of these conversations in today's society, because it will allow for us to grow as a collective more so. And instead of us growing apart, it will allow for us to be able to grow together. It will allow for us to be able to build the community that we so desperately want. So many of us want to be accepted, but we don't even accept ourselves. We don't even like ourselves, let alone love ourselves. Sometimes we speak so negatively about ourselves. We don't have positive things, positive affirmations that we're able to put over our lives on a consistent basis, and we expect other people to come in and fill voids within ourselves that we don't yet know how to meet our own expectations for. And it's not healthy. We have to just learn how to become more accountable for ourselves, guys, and it's important. One thing that I would say in terms of a boundary in a parental relationship, for instance, especially as adults, because as children, we have one reflection of our parents, and then we grow up as adults, and so that may change, it may alter, it may vary as we become adults and we start to identify who we are as adults and individuals. But it's really just giving yourself an opportunity. So many people wear certain masks in their relationship with their parents, like their parents don't actually know who they are. And it would be a shock if their parents actually was to see who they are. They would be completely flabbergasted, like, who is this person? I didn't raise this person, because they don't accept themselves. They're in fear. They're living in fear themselves of the world outside of themselves. The first step to acceptance outside of yourself is to accept yourself within yourself. Establishing healthy boundaries in a relationship allows both partners to feel comfortable and develop positive self-esteem. Absolutely. In order to establish boundaries, you need to be clear with your partner who you are, what you want, your beliefs and values, and your limits. Absolutely. That's pretty much it. Like, unfolded, unpacked. That's pretty much it. And a lot of times people don't actually know what they want, which is a bit of an issue. They are more likely to tell you what they don't want, which is basically it's kind of like them subconsciously letting you know that they tend to create from a pessimistic pattern, and they're only able to see what they don't want versus what they do want. So a lot of the times, particularly, I would say, and this is like no shade to females, but I would say majority of the times you'll get this from what I can see in most cases from females. You also get it from a lot of guys as well. But we don't know what we want. We're so much more clearer on what we don't want, and because we're focused on what we don't want, we're creating more of what we don't want. So in order for us to be able to navigate our way away from that, we have to become a little bit more clearer about what we do want. So if we're saying, okay, I don't want somebody who do you think optimism is true always? No, I don't think that somebody, I'm not optimistic all the time. And it is what helps me to grow. I think that it's important for us to travel into our shadows. That's also another thing. We don't know how to navigate through our shadows in today's society. We're like a bunch of pleasure seekers. We just want to stay on high vibrations of positivity all the time. So when negativity hits, we actually don't know how to navigate our way through it as a result of that. But it's important to navigate our way through the darkness, through the shadows, because that is what allows for our light to shine brighter, for one, but it's also what teaches us about who we are. And there's no way to know who we are by only focusing on the light, because it's the yin and yang, it's the duality of life. Within every light force, there's a speck of darkness, and within every dark force, there's a speck of light. And we need to be able to identify and embody the duality of our character, I don't think that somebody has to be completely optimistic all the time. And I think if they are optimistic all the time, I want to say that they are wearing a mask at least 30% of that time. I really just want to say that they are wearing a mask at least 30% of that time. They're telling themselves a story to how can I put it, to dispel the negativity, but they're not actually working through the negativity. And you find this a lot with motivational speakers as well. It's a great tactic, but guess what happens? Because because the mind conditions the avatar, the mind basically conditions your DNA. If you aren't working through the shadows of yourself, your body still remembers the trauma. It doesn't mean that you have healed. It simply means that you have suppressed that wound and you haven't acknowledged it. You haven't addressed it. You don't know how to navigate your way through it. And you've just got by. You've survived. You haven't actually thrived. There's a difference. And we have to be mindfully aware of that by doing the work, by taking the time to actually be in our low vibration from time to time. These are the things that teaches us our boundaries. These are the things that help us find out, okay, I don't want to go back to that dark place. I call it shadow island. Personally speaking, that's how I refer to it with my clients. It's like where your consciousness goes to acknowledge the darker reflections of yourself. And it's like a hospital for your consciousness. And there's different wards to the hospital. There's depression, there's anxiety, there's worry, there's fear, which is basically the actual entire island in itself. But it's when the ego gets drowned in emotions of lower vibrational reflections of ourselves. That's when we go to shadow island. And that's when we go into the dark place within ourselves. And it's important to go to shadow island and do a good little stay every so often and patch yourself back up and come back up to surface. And once you can breathe again, you learn so much more about yourself, and you can communicate to other people, and you can let other people know, this is really who I am. And then you don't have to run and hide and shy away from yourself, because I speak to so many people who they think that they know themselves, but they know the mask that they wear through optimism. And they have no idea of how many programs of pessimism and skeptical viewpoints are being perpetuated in the subconscious mind. These are all default programs that they don't see all the way through. All tips you are saying is for any relationship. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it's important to be very, very transparent in all of our relationships. I tell you what, if you are not transparent in one relationship, that kind of pattern will start to bleed over into other relationships as well. The moment you start to wear a mask in one relationship, you will learn and develop how to wear a mask in your other relationships as well. And you will get to a point where you are just a person in your head and not a person in your 3D reality. Nobody will actually know you. They will have an idea of who you are, but nobody will actually know you. And so many people will basically just experience so many different variations of you. Nobody actually knows who you are, and nobody can actually say, okay, I've seen this side to him, or I've seen this side to her, and this is what I'm used to. They will just continue to see so many different masks. I think sometimes the truth makes problems in our relationship. Absolutely, the truth hurts. Absolutely, the truth hurts. And this is why we need to be able to build up our strength of our relationships. Um, what's my mind? What do you mean, what's my mind? Because I do agree with you. The truth does impact our relationships, because some people are busy lying to themselves. And the moment that you are willing to be honest, that relationship is going to unravel. And it's supposed to. Why? Because it was a relationship built on a false narrative. It was a relationship built on lies. It was a relationship built on one or both parties of the relationship wearing masks. So nobody was actually being themselves. And that isn't healthy. Why? Because we don't get the opportunity to really, really experience this spiritual being within our avatar, having this human experience. We just want to meet other people's expectations and please other people, and we forget about ourselves in the process. This is why being honest and open in relationships is very, very important. Even if it creates problems, guess what? It will strengthen the foundations of your relationship, because now this is a relationship that is built on honesty and truth. Go for it. Can you talk? Go for it. I'm actually due to log off in the next, I want to say 7 to 8 minutes or so, because this was actually supposed to be like a 90-minute session, but I was just so engaged in the conversation, and the fact that you guys are, just open to the process, it just really allowed for me. But I will give you 5 minutes on the floor. I'm going to open the lines for you, Kamal, and if you want to call through. I've opened the line. So if you want to call through, we can have a quick 5-minute discussion, hopefully, about the situation, and then sort of like wrap up the space, because it would be easier perhaps maybe than typing if you're open to just being live. But yeah, I think that if we don't allow for the truth, what happens when we're honest in relationships as well? We grow. Guys, like we actually grow. We grow so much quicker. We have a unlimited potential of our growth. Whereas when we restrict ourselves to other people's expectations and being like scared basically of whether or not they'll accept us, it just puts us in a position of limiting ourselves and restricting ourselves based on how they are or are not willing to grow themselves. And a lot of the times when we are honest and it creates problems in our relationships, guess what? It gives us an opportunity to make a decision. Is this a relationship that I can continue to grow in? Or is this a relationship that I'm going to have to be able to not necessarily move away from and say goodbye forever, but we have to understand people come into our lives for seasons and reasons. And a lot of the times, because we are so emotionally attached to people, we don't know when their season has ended. And even when their seasons have ended and the universe is already showing us so many different signs and God is saying it's time to walk away from the relationship, we continue to force it because we have an unhealthy attachment to these people. And this is why it's important for us to form boundaries with ourselves first and foremost before perpetuating or trying to even perpetuate cycles of boundaries with relationships with other people, because unless we have a healthy relationship with ourselves, we can't have a healthy relationship with anybody else. It's just not possible. Unfortunately, we will wear masks in those relationships. We will tell ourselves that we are a version of ourselves that they are comfortable with so that we can feel accepted by them. And we will never know who we really and truly had the potential to be as a result. A lot of the people, I guess, over the course of as I continue to go on my own personal growth, um, excuse me, we're hearing whose voice? Well, when we are going through a process of growing, a lot of things that people say to us actually create subconscious programmings, and we're not really aware of this. So, people plant seeds in our subconscious mind constantly, all the time. We are programmable beings. That's what it means to be a human, and when someone says something, especially when we're in a relationship with someone, even with our parents, for instance, we always want to meet our parents' expectations, right? And when we fall short of meeting their expectations, we feel guilty. Why do we feel guilty? It was never our expectation in the first place. That's not something we expected of ourselves. That was somebody else's expectation. It would have been nice to be able to meet that expectation, but maybe that's not our purpose in life. Maybe that's not for us to walk. That's not our path. And a lot of the times, parents live vicariously through their children, anyways. And it's not a healthy reality for us to be able to, I guess, engage in, anyways, because we came here to be ourselves. Instead, we end up being puppets of our parents. I am a counselor. I am a counselor. Yeah, I'm a counselor. I'm an intuitive. I'm an astrologer. I do a lot of things. I do Reiki, a lot of stuff. I just help people. I help people. That's my passion. I love helping people. And I do these podcasts just because I like to be able to give people an opportunity to just free themselves from the shackles of the things, the thoughts that they tell themselves about themselves, and just know that there are other alternatives, there are other possibilities, there are other realities to your current existence in life. And all you have to do is make a single decision. It really is that simple. And that decision is to choose yourself. Not selfishly. It's not about being selfish, okay? And it's not about being selfless. It's about being self full. You have to be full of yourself and not being big headed. I don't mean it like that. I mean being full within yourself, not needing for anybody else to pour into you for you to, feel secure, for you to build self esteem. Like self esteem starts with self. It doesn't start with you feeding off other people, making you feel better about yourself. That isn't a self esteem. That is somebody else's esteem. And the moment that person stops stroking your ego, you have no security. And we just need to sort of move away from that. What do you mean when you say where am I from, Kamal? Do you mean location wise? Because I'm based in the UK. I'm based in Essex in the UK. If you mean background, yeah, yeah. I'm based in the UK. there's just a lot that we need to be doing as a collective. Essex, I'm not too far from Essex, London. I'm just on the outskirts of London. I'm based in Essex. London's a little bit too toxic for me. I lived in London for a long time, and the energies are just a little bit too much. And because I'm a sensitive avatar, basically, it was just becoming too much of a buildup of congestions of people projecting their shadows. So I had to get to a place where nature was a little bit more abundant so that I can decompress some of that energy. But guys, just love yourselves enough to be honest with yourselves. Love yourselves enough to be honest with the people around you. Love yourselves enough to just be more of who you are, because you are beautifully unique, gracefully broken, divinely special, created for a special purpose, because God had a reason for you. You know, spirit had a reason for you, source, universe, whatever you want to call it. You know, something outside of yourself that is creating life had a reason for you. What's your mind about Prince Harry and his wife decision? I think that that's the best thing that they could have done for themselves. That was their decision to make. And I'm glad that they took the opportunity to be completely honest about where they are with the situation. And I'm glad that they are at the place where they could have been completely received, because it could have gone a completely different way. Um, and spirit is just at that place where it's speaking through everyone. You know, it's about self realizations, and we can either continue to go through. Oh, you agree with me? If that's how you feel about it, I definitely agree, because I think that it's their decision to make. I agree with them. I agree with them. I think that it's their decision to make. I think that you know, not even to speak on the monarchy, because that's a long living tradition, longer than my days here. But I think it should be a choice and not a chore. You know, I think that's what, if it feels like a chore to them, then they should have a right to be able to say how they feel about it. And that's just how I feel. I feel like everybody has the right to make a decision for themselves, whether or not it is, you know, something that everybody else agrees with or not. And I don't think whether or not me or you agree with them, Kumar, I don't think it makes a difference to their decision. But I'm glad that, you know, we do agree with them, so they do have support for walking that next chapter of their journey. You know, when will you do another live stream? So I'll probably be doing another live stream next week, next Tuesday again. I don't know if you guys want to let me know of a topic that you guys would like me to speak about. I'm open, because sometimes I literally just kind of like select these topics based on what's going on, not just in my personal life, but also what I'm seeing a lot of through, I guess, my community, through my clients. So if you guys have like any suggestions on anything you'd like to hear me speak on, or get my opinion on something, then yeah, just kind of comment. But I'm definitely going to be live streaming again next week, so that we could just have an open floor, and an open just discussion, because I think that's what needs to be happening a little bit more for 2020 and beyond. We've entered into a new decade, and we can really take this as an opportunity. For me, 2020 is the decade of transparency, which is going to be key for mankind's healing as a collective consciousness, not just an individual based program. That being said, beloveds, I'm going to love you guys and leave it there for you guys. I've literally gone so far over the intended time, but I'm sending you guys nothing but love, light, and positive intentions for the journey. I hope that you guys, you know, take whatever gems you receive from this space, and may somebody out there be inspired enough to use this as an opportunity to kickstart the next, I guess, phase of their evolution. Okay, guys, I'm gonna love you guys and leave it there for you guys. In the meantime, thank you. You be safe as well, Ralph. Thank you. You've actually been really great. You've sat throughout the majority of the process, which is nice. If you guys do want to connect with me, I guess on any of my platforms, I'm just going to drop a little link here for you guys where you guys can connect with me. By my other social media channels, because I do a lot across the board through social media, so it will give you guys an opportunity to do so. There you go. That's pretty much everything that you guys need from me. But I'm gonna love you guys and leave you guys. Just thank you for being awesome. Thank you for being divine beings. Thank you for just allowing for the space to be so beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. I was supposed to be off my live stream 33 minutes ago, but just the sheer engagement was just amazing. Thank you, Jasmine. You've been sat into the space quietly, just receiving the information as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys so much. I'll be announcing the live, I guess probably by Friday, once I decide on a subject matter, maybe. Okay, but I'm gonna leave you guys to the rest of your week. Enjoy the rest of your night, and yeah, peace be with you guys. Take care.